So we're finally here, never before seen Power Ranger Monsters Part 7. Honestly, I didn't think we'd make it this far or this video series would get this much attention. I honestly thought that attention would start to waver off once we left the Zordon era, but no, I was proven wrong and people love to hear me talk about Power Ranger monsters that never made the cut. So in this video, we'll be covering Gaoranger and Wild Force. Both of these seasons were big deals when it came to Power Rangers and Super Sentai, Wild Force being the 10th anniversary for Power Rangers and Gaoranger being the 25th anniversary for Super Sentai, both series getting something to celebrate their anniversary. Now, if you're a fan of Power Rangers, you don't need to hear me talk about Forever Red for the 100th, millionth, billionth time. I mean, everyone who's a Power Ranger fan has talked about it, and I've talked about it a fair few times, but Forever Red is a pretty good episode to celebrate 10 years of Power Rangers. Getting together almost every Red Ranger from past series to fight the big bad Beetleborgs and take down Serpentera on the moon, it's a pretty good episode, and it holds a special place in people's hearts. Now, Gaoranger vs Super Sentai was something I had not seen until a couple of years ago, and the movie, it's pretty good, it's alright, I will say that. My main problem with the movie is it's a movie, but it's also a clip show movie where a bunch of legendary rangers show up and they say, hey, this is why we're so great, and then they show several minutes of a clip montage with how great these rangers are. So a lot of these cool moments in the movie is mostly through the clip show. Some characters do have some good moments on their own, but that's when they give older rangers some spotlight, like Big One and stuff like that. And it does have a really cool 25 Ranger roll call at the end with all the Red Rangers. That's one of the cool epic moments with this movie as well. But apart from that, it's okay. I mean, I've heard mixed things about it. Now, Power Rangers Wild Force is where I jumped off the Power Rangers train. Now, I've told this story in other videos before, but if Part 7 is your first time watching my videos and you're learning about this story, well, it's because Power Rangers had left free-to-air Australian TV. And to get new episodes, you either needed cable or Foxtel and stuff like that, or rented the DVDs or VHSs, and I didn't really do that back in the days, so around this time I was turning 13, so I decided I didn't really want to keep watching Power Rangers as I got older, so it's when I officially fell off. Now, funny story, Gaoranger was actually my first exposure to Super Sentai, although I didn't know it was Super Sentai. So, the story is, I got a copy of the Gaoranger game on PS1 from a relative when they went to Bali. I had no idea what this game was, I just thought it was a Power Rangers game in another language. And when I popped it into the PS1, I was in for something very different. Yeah, this game was really hard for me to play when I was a kid, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I wouldn't mind going back and revisiting this game and see how it holds up. Maybe I'll play it on a stream, maybe I'll play it on a separate video, no idea, but I would love to go back and revisit this really old Super Sentai game. Anyways, let's go back to talking about Power Rangers Wild Force and Gaoranger. So, there were 9 monsters that never made it into Wild Force that were from the Gaoranger Super Sentai footage, and the wiki doesn't really tell us why these 9 rangers were cut from Gaoranger, so I had to do some detective work. I put on my detective glasses and turned on my VPN and sat down and watched the episodes where these monsters appeared in. Now, if you want to watch Gaoranger for yourself, like I always say, you can watch Gaoranger and other Super Sentai series on the Tokusatsu website that Shout Factory has, or you can buy the official DVD release by Shout Factory as well. So if you want to support the official release, it'd be much appreciated, so you can help us see more Tokusatsu stuff released in the nearby future. So with that said, let's talk about some monsters that were never released. Alright, first up is Copyorg. Copyorg first appears in episode 12, and watching this episode I could understand why this monster didn't appear, because his old gimmick was copying the Rangers and turning into them. So there's a lot of unmorphed Super Sentai footage, and sometimes that's really hard for Saban to cut around unless they film their own footage. So sometimes they'll do it, sometimes they won't do it. But what's also really interesting about this episode is one of those episodes where the Rangers face off against evil copies of themselves, something that is like a staple in Power Rangers history, where they face off against evil clones of themselves, whether there's something similar to the Psycho Rangers or just doppelgangers. But in Power Rangers Wild Force, they completely skip that aspect, and we don't see that at all in this episode. So we totally skip over the Org Rangers in this episode. Okay, next up is Glasses Org. So the whole concept of this episode is a pair of glasses, and when you wear the glasses, you get put under mind control or something like that. So the whole premise of this episode is the Black Ranger getting manipulated into retiring so he can hand over his orb. Now, watching this episode, I can understand why it was skipped, because it's a very story-focused episode, and there's barely any morphed fights to keep the attention of the young viewers, because you know the Saban motto, if the Rangers aren't morphed, then people should be asking, why aren't they morphed and fighting? And I think there's only roughly about 2 morphed fight scenes in this episode, and I think Saban had a goal to have like at least 2 morphed fights per episode, and if there wasn't many footage to work around it, then he probably skipped it. So I can understand why this monster was skipped in the end. Alright, next on the list, Human Body Specimen Org. Alright, looking at this cool monster design, you can probably guess why it was skipped. The skeleton design and how demonic it looked, it was probably too terrifying for the kids. And he honestly doesn't look that gruesome and scary. He honestly looks a little bit silly with how his design looks, so maybe that's why he was skipped. But if he was one of those terrifying monsters, then yeah, I can understand why this monster was skipped in the end and why Saban chose not to adapt it. Alright, so this is a weird monster. Vase Org. So the whole concept of this monster is an org that can suck up anything he marks with his seal paper into his vase. So the whole concept of this episode introduced the Soul Bird, and if you've seen what the Soul Bird in Super Sentai looks like, yeah, it looks like a bit of a puppet, and what we got in Wild Force was an overly exposed CGI thing, so you can't really tell what it was. So they were sort of the same concept, but they sort of had to do their own thing with what the Soul Bird was in Wild Force. So I'm guessing what the writers decided to do was scrap the whole Org Vase monster and just do their own thing, whatever footage they can find, and make their own story out of it. And I guess it turned out well for them. Now, one of the things we talk about in this series a lot is monsters that have a human form, and they spend an awfully lot of time in that human form around the story of the Super Sentai episode. And this monster is one of those cases. Charcoal Grill Org. Now, this monster was a human, and he's got a bit of a backstory, and I don't want to spoil the episode because it's kind of a sad backstory because the monster wants to be redeemed, and it's a really interesting episode and I highly recommend checking it out. But yeah, this episode was one of those sad monster backstories and he's got a human form thing going on. So once again, if you get around to watching Gaoranger, I highly recommend giving this episode a watch. Alright, so here's a monster I forgot about because I forgot to write it in my notes. Blacksmith Org. I forgot to watch this episode, but looking at the wiki, it looks like he stole the Rangers' weapons, and then the Rangers had to find a way to get their weapons back, and then they defeat him. But yeah, this one I messed up on and accidentally skipped over, so my bad. Okay, these ones are kind of really easy to explain. Christmas Org and New Year's Org. So, because Super Sentai airs at the start of the month, usually depending on when they air, they'll have episodes that line up with the holidays or New Year's, showing that the show kind of takes place in the current year and moving along into the next year as well as the show airs. So in this case, and usually in most cases with Super Sentai, sometimes you'll get holiday themed monsters. Usually I see this a lot with Kamen Rider and stuff like that, where usually their story arcs take place around Christmas as well when they're airing. Kamen Rider X8 is known for having a really fun Christmas episode along with Gaim. So usually Super Sentai will do the same thing when their episodes take place around the holiday, and they'll have some kind of celebration episode. And because Power Rangers doesn't really acknowledge the whole festive spirit most of the time, depending on what season it is, if it's Mighty Morphin or something like that, sometimes those episodes will get skipped. And this is the case with Wild Force as well, where they chose not to adapt the holiday-themed episodes from Gaoranger. Now, there are also 2 hidden contenders that also never made into Wild Force that were cut from Gaoranger. First up is Snowman Org. Now, Snowman Org, I can totally understand why this was cut, because this only appeared in a Gaoranger interactive CD-ROM that was only released in Japan, so it's very obvious why this one didn't make the cut. And the second one is Lost Highness Duke Rakashasha. I probably butchered that name, but this monster only appeared in Super Sentai vs. Gaoranger, or Gaoranger vs. Super Sentai. So he's a movie exclusive villain that never made the cut because they never adapted Gaoranger vs. Super Sentai, so I can totally understand why this guy was skipped as well. So yeah, those were the monsters that were cut from Gaoranger that never appeared in Power Rangers Wild Force. What do you guys think of them? Would you guys like to see these monsters appearing in Power Rangers Wild Force? How would have you adapted it into Wild Force? Tell me in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear how you guys would have adapted these monsters, or what are your thoughts on these monsters that never appeared in the Power Rangers show. So, with that said, that's going to bring Never Before Seen Power Ranger Monsters Part 7 to a close. Next month, we'll be diving into the Disney era, and I'm probably going to have to watch a lot of Super Sentai to understand why these monsters were never adapted into Power Rangers, so that's going to be a fun challenge for me. But what are you guys looking forward in the next upcoming series of Power Rangers Never Before Seen Monsters? Because it looks like we're in for a wild ride moving forward. So with that said, I'm going to bring this video to a close. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Special thanks to all the members such as Swaggerful and Andrew McCoyle, and the Power Bunny was a $30 member. If you want to get your name shouted out like these guys over here, hit the join button and become a Patreon supporter for special perks and stuff like that on the channel. With that said, I'm out of here. Have a wonderful day or night. See you guys later. Peace out. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.